Jane Gamble. Welcome to our wildlife garden here in Alexandria, Virginia. For the past 5 years, my husband and I have worked hard to create a sustainable garden that supports wildlife and benefits the environment. When we bought this property, there wasn't a single plant or shrub, just a few old trees. The only thing that was here were crickets and grasshoppers, lots of them. The previous owner said that for $40 a month, an exterminator would spray the lawn and kill the crickets. But to me, it didn't make sense to pay someone good money to dump chemicals on our property. What we needed were the natural predators that eat crickets. Frogs, snakes, small amphibians. But really, the very best things for controlling insects on your lot are birds. They're really the linchpin to any great garden. And a hungry bird that's got babies to feed and little mouths to fill is a true predator on crickets. So what we did was create a garden that brought in the birds. Because we were starting from scratch, we needed to create beds for the plantings. Using a rented sod cutter, my husband created multiple beds around the foundation of the house and the perimeter of the property. We flipped the sod to cover the exposed area, and the grass then decomposed and helped to build the soil. Then we covered the beds with very thick layers of wood chips that we received for free from local arborists. We've spread more than 150 yards of wood chips on our beds, and the result has been better soil that retains moisture and is less prone to weeds. Mulch is the critical component to any garden, and I encourage you to get it by the dump truck load, because buying it by the bag is not only expensive, but it also creates a lot of plastic waste. Within a year of creating the beds, we were ready to begin planting, and we've never stopped. And now I'd like to take you to the other side of the fence and show you the inner garden. Come with me. I love to have a pathway in the garden. I put this one in last year using 100-year-old bricks that a neighbor was getting rid of. I use a lot of recycled and reclaimed things in this garden. As you can see, this shade garden is very densely planted. One of the few trees that were on the property was an old holly tree, and that's what's providing really important shade in this area. It's quite densely planted, and that's in order to provide cover for small animals. Here I've used an old clay pot to make a little toad house, although I'm not sure that any toads have moved in yet. Although the birds are nesting quite naturally in the trees that we've planted, I've also put up a little gourd house here. I found it at a fair and thought it was pretty charming, and I was hoping that it wasn't going to just be decorative. And as it turned out, we have a little house wren that's building a nest in there now. It's very delightful to watch it, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully a successful nest there. Here the path leads to our very small wildlife pond. I really wish this was larger because having a wildlife pond in your yard is such a great way of bringing in the animals. This is actually just a plastic liner that I picked up for free on the internet, and I'm using a solar generated pump. The sound of the running water brings in the birds, it brings in small amphibians, and also it keeps the water from freezing up. That's the solar panel that's generating that pump that's just recirculating in there. We've got birds that come in here frequently to bathe and to drink, and we even have a little resident frog. This little leopard frog moved into the pond shortly after we put it in last year. He hibernated over the winter and has successfully made this little place his home. I want to remind everybody that if you put in a water feature, remember to also provide extra protection for the wild creatures that will be attracted to your ponds. Back here, I've stacked up a bunch of old logs. It makes for a great place for the frogs and the snakes and the skinks to find shelter during the summer, but also to hibernate in the winter. It's just one more thing to think about when we're creating habitat for wildlife in our gardens. If you don't have room in your garden for a little wildlife pond, then definitely consider bird baths. Here our little resident robin is demonstrating just how greatly they're appreciated. And remember to clean them out frequently, give them nice fresh water, and in the winter when water freezes over, birds especially appreciate being given a fresh source that they can rely on. It's wonderful to think that we're taking care of our little feathered friends. When we create natural habitat for wildlife in our gardens, we're providing food and shelter for creatures who need to share our world. So consider planting fruiting trees and shrubs. This old holly is a much relied upon source of berries during the long winter months. We can also provide nesting materials simply by leaving dried grasses and twigs in some corner of the garden. Or you can make a nesting ball like this one. And don't forget to plant the trees where your birds will be building those nests. Consider making a bee hotel for the solitary bees. And most importantly, don't forget the monarchs. They need our help. Their numbers are down 90% of what they were in 1992. Milkweed plants are the only source of food for the monarch caterpillar, but these plants are rapidly disappearing due to the loss of habitat stemming from land development and weed killer. So do your part and plant some milkweed and help the monarchs. A sustainable wildlife garden can also include areas that help sustain you and your family. During lockdown, we created this kitchen garden in an area of the yard that was truly empty except for a row of trees we'd planted. My husband built the arbors and trellis and put in the raised beds. I bricked the paths using more free bricks from the internet. The great thing about the brick is that it retains heat, which helps the vegetables grow strongly. We planted raspberries, blackberries, gooseberries, currants, blueberries, strawberries, fig trees, a plum tree, grape and kiwi vines, plus the seasonal vegetables. The neighbor kids are looking forward to this summer's harvest, though they'll have to share it with any wildlife that may get there first. This is our little composting station. It's an important part of our garden. We compost all of our fruit and vegetable kitchen scraps in these rolling compost bins. I've added worms to mine to keep the compost on the wet side because I use the worm tea that I collect from the bottom of the barrel on my potted plants. It's a fantastic natural fertilizer. It's important to remember that organic material makes up somewhere between a quarter to a half of a household's total waste, so composting can massively reduce the amount of trash in our bins and the space taken up in landfills. When people throw their food scraps into the trash and it ends up in a landfill, those scraps never break down because they don't get the air they need to biodegrade. Plus, the food waste releases a gas called methane, which warms the Earth's atmosphere and causes climate change. Composting means we can avoid all of this. It's an easy way to help slow climate change and keep our drinking water safe while being responsible with our food waste and building our gardens. I wanted to share with you a fun and sustainable way to create small focal areas in the garden using natural materials. Here I've used old stumps that I've found at construction sites or along the road. The stumps were mostly hollow when I found them, and I brought them home, filled them with soil, and then planted little vignettes around them using woodland plants or something that had a little punch of color and interest. I actually have 5 of these all over my garden. I think they're super charming and a nice way to break up a long border with something that's colorful and natural and that brings a little bit of seasonal flair to your garden. With the impacts of global warming, normal seasonal droughts, and ever-increasing pressure on public water supply, it makes sense to use rainwater instead of municipal water for outdoor uses. Unless it's collected, rainwater runs off impervious surfaces and gathers pollutants which often end up in local streams, rivers, and lakes. Using a rain barrel will allow you to capture water that's otherwise lost to storm drains and divert that water to your landscape. And this way we conserve tap water, lower our water bills, and protect aquatic systems from polluted runoff. We have 3 rain barrels and I love them. Every time it rains, I feel like I'm somehow growing richer by saving a precious resource. In conclusion, I want to thank you for visiting my little slice of heaven. I hope you've picked up a new idea or two that you can take into your own garden. My parting words are a plea that you think twice before ever using pesticides, that you plant for pollinators, and that you make a space in your garden for wildlife. Thank you. Bye-bye.